The sound of a father's jaw breaking against marble echoed through the lobby of Kessler Tower before anyone understood what had happened, and by the time the CEO stepped out of her private elevator, the man lay bleeding on the floor while his 6-year-old daughter screamed his name. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in stories that remind us who we really are underneath our titles and our pain, hit like, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, share this with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Wisdom Story House so you never miss a story like this one. Daylight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Kessler Tower that Tuesday afternoon, gilding the polished floors in gold, when Marcus Reyes walked through the revolving doors holding his daughter Nora's hand. Marcus was 34, broad-shouldered, quiet in the way men become quiet after they've seen things they can never unsee. He wasn't there to make trouble. He was there because his daughter's school had called an emergency pickup, her fever spiking, and the only place he could think to bring her while he waited for his shift supervisor to approve an early leave was the lobby of the building where he worked nights as part of the cleaning crew. He thought, foolishly perhaps, that 10 quiet minutes on a bench near the elevators wouldn't hurt anyone. He didn't know that the woman who owned that tower, Vivian Ashcroft, had given standing orders that no unauthorized personnel were to loiter near the executive elevators, not after the break-in attempt 2 months earlier that had left her rattled in ways she never spoke about aloud. He didn't know that her head of security, a broad man named Dale Pruitt, had been itching for a reason to prove his team's vigilance to a boss who barely acknowledged their existence. So when Marcus stood to soothe his crying, feverish daughter, shifting his weight and raising his voice just slightly to calm her, 2 guards descended on him like he was a threat instead of a father. The first punch came without warning, catching Marcus across the cheek before he even registered the hand moving toward him. The second guard grabbed his collar and shoved him into the marble pillar, and Nora's screams turned the entire lobby to stone. Employees stopped mid-step. A woman near the coffee cart dropped her cup. And Marcus, a man who could have disarmed both guards in under 4 seconds without breaking a sweat, did nothing to defend himself, because his daughter was watching, and the last thing he wanted her to see was her father as someone dangerous. Vivian Ashcroft emerged from the elevator at that exact moment, dressed in the charcoal blazer that had become something of an armor for her over the past decade, her mind still tangled in the merger she'd been finalizing upstairs. She froze at the sight in front of her, a man on the ground, blood at his mouth, a little girl in a yellow sundress clutching his sleeve and sobbing so hard her small body shook. Something about the scene cracked through the professional detachment she'd built around herself like a shell. She didn't know why her chest tightened the way it did, why her hands went cold, why for one disorienting second she felt like she was 11 years old again, trapped somewhere dark, waiting for someone to come. "Enough," she said, and her voice, though not loud, carried the kind of authority that silenced the entire lobby instantly. She crouched down, ignoring the stares of her own employees, and looked at the man's face properly for the first time. And that was when the ground seemed to shift beneath her. She knew that face. She had spent 11 years trying to forget it and failing every single time she closed her eyes. 9 years ago, before Vivian Ashcroft was the woman who ran a real estate empire worth hundreds of millions, she had been a 26-year-old aid worker trapped in a collapsed building during a coastal flood disaster overseas, buried under rubble for 6 hours while water rose around her ankles and then her knees. She remembered the darkness pressing in, remembered praying in a language she didn't even believe she still knew, and she remembered the moment a gloved hand broke through the debris above her and a low, steady voice told her she was going to be fine, that he wasn't leaving without her. That voice had belonged to a Navy SEAL on a joint rescue operation, a man whose name she never learned because she passed out from exhaustion the moment he pulled her free, and who vanished from her life as quickly and completely as he'd entered it. She had spent years afterward trying to track him down through official channels, hitting wall after wall of classified operations and redacted names, until she finally accepted that the man who saved her life would remain a ghost she carried gratitude for and never got to thank. And now that ghost was lying on the floor of her own building with a split lip, having just been assaulted by the very security team she employed to keep people safe. "Say something," she whispered, staring at him, searching his face for confirmation her heart had already given her. Marcus, wiping blood from his mouth with the back of his hand, looked up at her with the same steady calm she remembered from that night in the wreckage, and recognition passed over his features too, quiet and stunned. "You cut your hair," he said simply, and something about the absurdity and gentleness of that sentence broke her composure entirely. The story spread through Kessler Tower and then the city within hours, not because Vivian orchestrated any of it, but because the truth was too extraordinary to stay contained. The single father who mopped floors and emptied trash bins after midnight, who had been quietly struggling to raise his daughter alone since his wife passed away from an illness 3 years prior, who had never once mentioned his military past to a single coworker because he didn't believe in wearing his service like a badge, turned out to be the same man who had pulled the city's most powerful CEO from a graveyard of concrete and steel nearly a decade earlier. Vivian fired Dale Pruitt within the hour, not in a fit of temper but with the cold clarity of a woman who finally understood that fear-based leadership breeds cruelty, and cruelty had almost cost her the one debt she could never fully repay. She sat with Marcus and Nora in her private office while a company doctor examined his jaw, and for the first time in years, Vivian Ashcroft cried in front of another human being, apologizing not just for what her guards had done but for every year she had spent unable to find him, unable to say thank you, unable to close the wound that his disappearance had left open inside her. Marcus, holding his daughter against his chest as she finally drifted into an exhausted, feverish sleep, told her there was nothing to apologize for, that he had left the service and vanished from records on purpose because some missions demanded silence even afterward, and that he had built a quiet life for his daughter because quiet was the only kind of peace he knew how to give her. He told her working nights let him pick Nora up from school every afternoon, that a broken jaw was nothing compared to nights in places far darker than any lobby, and that seeing her alive and thriving all these years later was, strangely, the best possible outcome of the worst possible day. What began as an act of injustice slowly transformed into something neither of them could have predicted. Vivian insisted on covering Nora's medical care, then found herself visiting the small apartment Marcus shared with his daughter, drawn back again and again, not out of guilt but out of a gravity she didn't fully understand until Nora started calling her Miss Vivi and running to hug her legs every time she visited. She created a foundation within her company for veterans transitioning into civilian work, staffed initially by men and women just like Marcus who had spent years unseen despite everything they'd sacrificed. And Marcus, for the first time since his wife's passing, allowed himself to imagine a future that included more than just survival for his daughter's sake. If this story touched something in you, if you believe that people who quietly carry the weight of heroism deserve to be seen, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and share it with someone who might need this reminder today. Your support means more than you know and helps this channel keep telling stories worth telling. Before we reach the end, I have one small request. Type the word grateful in the comments if this story reminded you that the quietest people often carry the heaviest, most beautiful histories. 6 months later, on a warm afternoon with sunlight spilling across a park where Nora chased pigeons in a new yellow dress, Vivian sat beside Marcus on a wooden bench, watching the little girl laugh with the kind of freedom that only comes when a child feels safe. Vivian turned to him and said that she used to think she owed him a debt she could never repay, but now she understood that what he'd given her wasn't just a rescue from rubble years ago, but a second rescue now, from a life of isolation she hadn't even realized she was living. Marcus smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes for the first time in years, and told her that maybe some people are just meant to keep saving each other, in different ways, at different times, for as long as it takes to finally call it home.